think it's a real shame to go out and buy ready-made food when you can cook something cheaper and so much better tasting at home. Hello, my name is Liz Yvonne and I'm bringing to you my cooking show, Simply Scrumptious. Simply because I don't want things to be complicated in the kitchen. There's enough things going on in our very busy lives, and scrumptious because food's got to be good. You've got to like what you're cooking. Today I'm going to prepare for you two dishes which come from Europe, one from England where I was born and one from France where I lived for about 12 years. The first dish is called a Lancashire Hotpot. This is a traditional dish coming from the county of Lancashire, which is in the northwest of England, and it's a base of lamb, onions and potatoes. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to call it a Lancashire Hotpot since I've rather changed the ingredients for modern standards. There's a lot less fat and the cooking time is cut by at least an hour and a half, so maybe we should call it a Princeton Hotpot. The second dish is a Tarte, Tatin. A Tarte Tatin comes from France. It originated in the Loire Valley in the 19th century at the Hotel Tatin, which was run by the Tatin sisters, Stephanie and Caroline, I believe. Stephanie was the cook, and she was a great cook, but apparently very absent-minded. And one day she heard a gunshot when people were out hunting, and she somehow or other managed to put the pie in the oven upside down, the apple pie in the oven upside down. She got it out, served it anyway, and she turned it over. So it is an upside down apple tart. Actually, it's become one of the most famous dishes in French cuisine, and the very, very famous French restaurant called Maxime's in Paris thought the recipe was so wonderful that they sent a little spy down to the hotel to try and find the recipe. So let's start by making the pastry, since we have to leave it to rest. We need all-purpose flour, chilled butter, a little bit of sour cream. Now the recipe does actually ask for crème fraîche or fromage frais, but don't go and buy that. Sour cream is absolutely fine. You can use low-fat or regular sour cream, a little bit of vanilla extract and a little pinch of salt. Now I know that you work in cups in the United States, so I think it's 2 cups of flour to 1 cup of butter, oh there's sugar as well, to half a cup of sugar. Now unfortunately I'm stuck in my ways, so I'm going to use my faithful scales and I'm going to measure out 8 ounces. When I lived in France, of course, I then had to convert everything to grams, which is why I bought these scales. Let me move this across. I like to make my pastry in the food processor because it's just so much quicker, and who has time to make pastry these days? But it really is worth making your own pastry rather than buying it. So this is my bowl. It's obviously been in the microwave or the dishwasher when it shouldn't have done. It's a little bit misshapen. In goes the flour, next the butter, and I have to say this is one of my favorite parts of discovering things in America. It is just so cool to have your butter in sticks of 4 ounces or half a cup, no, a whole cup, whatever it is, a whole cup. I always wondered how on earth you measured out a tablespoon of butter, and now I understand. So there we go. I'm just cutting the butter into the food processor like that. This has started to get a little bit soft, but I shouldn't worry. In we go. And then finally, we have the sugar. Where did my spoon go? And it's 2 ounces or half a cup of sugar. And there we are. There's the top to the... Okay, let's mix those together for a few minutes. Now to that we're going to add just a little pinch of salt and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Where's my teaspoon? There we go, which I put through the funnel here. And And then last of all, 3 tablespoons of the sour cream, or if you do have it, you can always put in the crème fraîche or the fromage frais. So 3 tablespoons of that. Now you can see, you know, my tablespoons are a little bit heaped. Because honestly, I don't really think we need to worry about things being perfect when we're cooking. All right, I've lost the top to my funnel, there it is. And let's go again. Now, of course, the pastry is still a little bit dry because we have to add a tiny bit of water. Now, I think this is probably the part that frightens everybody. How much water should I put in? So just go very, very slowly to begin with. I'm going to put it on. You'll see that it will come together. You'll be able to hear the noise. Just a tiny bit more. That's probably enough, maybe a tiny bit more. There we go, that's the bit I love. Bingo. All right, so this is my favorite pastry rolling board, and you might be wondering why I have a purple circle here. Well, you know, I go rolling pastry and then I have way too much and it's too big. So what I did was I took my Tarte Tatin tin, which actually isn't a Tarte Tatin tin, it's just a regular tin, don't worry, although I think you can spend a lot of money and get a Tarte Tatin tin at, you know, one of those nice cooking shops. And I went underneath, drew a circle, obviously not on top because I don't think you want ink in your pastry. And there we have, so I have a sort of template which is going to help me. I'm just going to put this to one side. So, now you want to carefully remove your pastry from the bowl. Be careful not to hurt yourself on here. Of course, you can do this by hand. If you don't have a food processor, you're supposed to be doing this by hand, but as you can see, it's very quick if you do it in the food processor. Let me take that away. Now you have to use a lot of flour, because the last thing you want to do is have flour stuck to your hands and stuck to the pastry board. It is a little bit sticky. Now at this point, most people say put the pastry in the refrigerator to rest because it shrinks. I say roll it out first. It's so much easier because if you take it out and it's a little bit hard, then you have to wait for it to soften so that you can roll it out. So my tip is do it my way. So anyway, you'll see that I'm very careful about flouring my surfaces, and I keep adding a little bit of flour. It's a very moist pastry, so don't worry about it getting too dry. And I keep rolling, turning all the time and even flipping over and making sure that nothing sticks. And I even keep the rolling pin. Do you see how I'm turning all the time? So easy, really. There's really nothing to be frightened about where pastry is concerned. And this pastry is just so delicious. I don't think that the traditional recipe has vanilla essence or cream in it, but you'll find that this is a pastry that you're going to be wanting to use for other dishes as well. Another thing that I like to do, and here's another tip, whilst I've got everything out, I sometimes make 2 batches and freeze one so that you can have something ready. I always like it when they say, for the unexpected guest. I mean, never have any unexpected guests who expect to have a tarte tatin at short notice, but, well, maybe you do. So here we are. Now, the way to transfer, what I'm going to do is put it on some greaseproof paper, as I call it. I think it's also parchment paper. And it would be nice if I managed this. And I roll it onto the rolling pin to be able to transfer it. There we go, that worked. And then roll it back onto the parchment paper, onto a dish that is more or less the same size. There we go. And you want to cover this with perhaps another piece of parchment paper. If you were going to put this into the freezer, at this point, you would roll it up. But since I'm going to use it in half an hour to an hour's time, that's all you need to do. I'm just going to leave it like that and put it in the refrigerator. And off I go. Well, I'm going to clear the decks now because we're going to, while the pastry's resting in the refrigerator, we're going to start preparing the Lancashire Hotpot. So let's put this over in the sink. So while our pastry is chilling out in the refrigerator, we're going to prepare the Lancashire/Princeton Hotpot. We're going to use these red potatoes. I've tried different kinds of potatoes, and not knowing much about potatoes, I have noticed that some go really gluey. These don't. We're going to use sliced potatoes. I think, again, to save time on peeling and on cooking, we're going to put them unpeeled in hot boiling water. I would say 2 pounds would be about 5 or 6 potatoes. So I'm going to put them in water here. I'll take my bowl over. And I'm going to parboil them. Parboil means not completely boil, just enough to be able to slip the skins off under running water, and then to be able to slice them and put them on top of our meat. Now that's going to come to the boil. I'll have to turn it down a little bit, otherwise it'll boil over. Cook's friend, I don't know anybody who knows what 15 minutes is when they go on to do something else. So long as I don't forget, to make sure I don't forget, I put my little timer on for about 15 minutes, and then you can check them. Okay, so I'll let those boil. The next thing we're going to do is prepare the vegetables. Now, the reason why I actually started cooking this hot pot in the first place was obviously childhood memories. Secondly, whoever ever finishes their celery? I have never finished the celery hanging around in the bottom of my refrigerator, so I thought at least I'm going to try and use up odds and ends. I have some carrots, I have some celery, I have a few other things that I'm going to show you. When I was in France, you could buy half a head of celery, which I very much appreciated. So supermarkets, if you'd like to start selling half a head of celery, I'm sure everybody would like that. So I start slicing my celery. Now I used 4 little sticks of celery, which of course I'd washed, got all the little bits of earth off. And you can use, if you only have 3 sticks left, use those. Don't worry about them being totally crisp, it really doesn't matter. I like to prepare my carrots like this. A friend of mine showed me a wonderful dish where you braise carrots with a little bit of sugar, some butter and some garlic, and she said to have the surface of your carrot as big as possible so that you can absorb all the tastes. So I've heeded that, and that's how I cut my carrots now. I can't help it. I think everybody has carrots. If you have those little carrots that you put in your children's lunch boxes, that'll do fine. Then you probably only need to cut those in half. There we are. Now, another thing I'm going to put in is, again, something that I find I buy and always have loads left of, is cilantro. Traditionally, you'd be putting parsley in this. I happen to have cilantro in my refrigerator, and I think it tastes very nice. It's a little bit of a different taste. And then you just want to chop it up. Again, being very careful with your fingers because you have a very sharp knife. And there we have it, some nicely chopped cilantro. Remember, there's going to be a layer of potatoes on top of this, so I wouldn't worry too much about chopping and chopping until it's really fine. This is lamb, it's cubed lamb. If you see, there's quite a bit of fat on it. So I don't actually use fat in my pan. I tend to use what is on the lamb, and you'll find that that will cook the rest of the vegetables as well. So let's take this over to the stove. You see the pan's nice and hot. There's going to be a big noise now. There we go. No, quite a little noise, that's fine. Now, I bought this in France, this pot, and in fact I'm going to use it to go in the oven. The handle comes off. You can do this separately. You can cook this dish in a regular pot with a lid, like those heavy French pots, or you can just use a regular casserole dish and make a lid out of aluminum, as you call it, foil. So I'm just going to remove that with a slotted spoon so that I can keep some of the fat. And as you can see, there's enough oil, fat from the meat. And of course, you can always double the recipe or go 1.5. There's no problem. In fact, when I make this dish, it's actually going to be quite shallow. So in this size dish, you could definitely increase the ingredients. Now, this is another tip. I am not ashamed to say that I think peeling and cutting onions is a real nuisance, and I cry and it's horrible, and I wear mascara, so it's a very big mess. One of the things that I found in the supermarkets is chopped frozen onions, and I think it's great. Now I actually did these myself because I had some onions and I put them through the food processor, so you can, if you want to feel a little bit virtuous, you can do your own and freeze them. So when you've chopped them and put them through the food processor, you want to lay them out on a tray and open freeze them first of all, because otherwise they'll clump together. In fact, these have clumped together a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. And then you can use them. They stay in the freezer for a long time, and it just saves you a lot of time and a lot of bother and a lot of crying. Now, I would say I don't really worry that much about quantities, but you want to put in about 2 onions. If you're going to be preparing your onions, I would put in 2 to 3 smallish onions. These are red onions. You can use regular onions as well. There we go. That's quite enough onions. And don't worry about defrosting your onions either, because we're going to have a sauce. So it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of moisture in the pan. And as you see, you probably want to turn the temperature up a little bit at this point. And as you can see, they cook and they brown very nicely, so they're taking in all the flavors from the lamb, and they're thawing at the same time. Now I have another tip if you want to hear my next tip. At this point I would go over to the sink and I would start washing up what I have to wash up, because that's basically going to save you time, because we know what it's like when we're a cook. We finish cooking, but our job's not over, because then we have to do the washing up, and there's not always a willing slave to do the washing up for you, or the dishes to do the dishes. So maybe you want to then, whilst you're waiting for the onions to cook, do a quick bit of washing up. Now again, I put my lid back on at this point and let it cook for a few minutes. Meanwhile, let's see what's happening to the potatoes. I'll get my knife and check. Yep, doing well. We have a few minutes left on the strawberry. And at this point, I think we can start the oven. We need to cook this at a very low temperature, because we're going to be cooking it for quite a while, for about an hour. So we're going to put it at 325. Now, I'm going to thicken the sauce. Well, we don't have a sauce yet, but this is going to thicken the sauce, a little sprinkling of flour. Now, I can't really tell you how much, maybe about a tablespoon. The French have this very nice expression. They do it au pif. Now, the pif is the nose. It's slang for a nose, so I guess according to what your nose thinks. So I think a little bit more. And now I'm going to add my vegetables. The carrots and the celery. We're going to add that to our dish. This time I have a few peas, beans, sugar snap peas, that sort of thing. Well, you see, frozen hard. I'm going to put the whole lot in. Now then, very carefully take your pan. We're going to take it over to the sink. And now you're going to run some cold water. And with this, you're going to slip the skins off very, very quickly. So this means that you're losing very little of the vitamins and the nutrients that come very close to the skins. And also, isn't that just so much quicker than peeling? And all I'm going to do now is put all the rest of the ingredients back in the pot. I'm also going to add some broth. I would say about 1.5 cups of broth. Remember that this is vegetable broth. You can also use a stock cube, or even if you make it yourself, you can have some homemade broth. I'm also going to add some Worcestershire, Worcestershire sauce. I'm allowed to say that, there's only one Worcestershire sauce, and I went to school in Worcester, so I'm very proud to use Worcestershire sauce, and there is actually a Lee & Perrins factory there. Very authentic, there you go. And of course you know that you can buy Worcestershire sauce very easily in the United States, so you're not going to be hunting high and low for that. You also want to put in 1 bay leaf, and I think you needn't worry too much about that staying in there. Most people know not to eat bay leaves if they find it in their dish. And either 2 sprigs of fresh thyme, which I don't have today, so just a little shake of dried thyme. Again, another thing to do with leftover herbs, if you've bought fresh herbs like thyme, rosemary, sage, you don't usually finish the bunch that you buy in one of those sachets. What I like to do is just hang them up and let them dry. If you leave them in the refrigerator, they go pretty horrible pretty quickly. So then you can crumble them up and put them in a sachet, something like that. So you can add it to your dish. A little bit of pepper. Some salt. Well, I have to take the top off because I haven't worked out how to use that yet. Now, salt to taste, people say. It's a little bit hard to know how salty you like your food, but you can always add. You can't take away. So I would err on the side of caution. A lot of people like a low sodium diet. And then I can't help it. I lived in France. I have to put wine in my food. And this really does make a big difference to the taste. And this certainly is not in the original Lancashire Hotpot, but quite often I have a little bit of wine. This was actually a bottle that wasn't good, so I just stuck it in the fridge. I wrote in big letters for cooking only so that nobody wanted to drink it, although most normal people wouldn't put red wine in the fridge anyway. So slosh a bit in. I was going to measure it, but that'll be fine. That smells good. Now with a little bit of flour that you've put in there, the sauce is going to be thickening nicely. It will have mixed with the fat from the meat, and then I'm going to add my cilantro. There. Again, another thing you can do with the cilantro, same idea as with the onions. If you have some left over, you can chop it up, lay it on greaseproof paper, put it in the freezer, and then put it in a sachet. In France, we're very lucky. We have some great, well, they have these wonderful stores where they sell frozen food, such as, I think the temperature's ready, such as fresh herbs, which have been freeze-dried, and wow, that's great. It's a shame it hasn't taken on here. Maybe it will. Okay. We'll just leave that now, and we're going to prepare our potatoes. I left the potatoes to cool a little bit before I have to handle them. So now you can handle your potatoes, and what you want to do is slice them. Well, these are a little bit sticky, but they'll be fine. Remember, they are going to be cooking for over an hour in the oven, so they'll have plenty of time to cook, and they are parboiled. There's a little bit that's not cooked in the middle. You could perhaps leave them for a little bit longer. It doesn't really matter, because remember, the original recipe puts them in uncooked. Let's bring them over here rather than bringing the hot things over to the cool things. I'm going to turn off the heat here. Now, if you're not using the pan, and I'm guessing that not everybody has this kind of pan, this is the moment when you would transfer it to your casserole, okay? Carefully. So I'm going to remove the lid, and I'm pretty pleased about the way it's looking. It's exactly the right thickness. And I'm going to have a little taste at this point just to see whether I've put in enough salt and enough herbs. I'm going to put in a little bit more salt. Now, in the traditional Lancashire hot pot, there are layers of meat, onions and potato, finishing with a layer of potato. This is the way I prefer to do it. This is the Princeton hot pot, remember. So we're going to take our potatoes and go round. Now, I heard that, or rather I read that a Lancashire hot pot was made and put in a pot that was a brown earthenware pot with straight sides, and that was the name of the hot pot. But also I read that it was made, wrapped up in a blanket and taken off for lunch on the day at the races. So I guess if you have a day at a baseball game, make a change from hot dogs, you might be surprising quite a few people, but I would just suggest having it for supper at home without trying to transport it. Okay, so now we've done our very, very attractive circular pattern of potatoes, and I'm just going to take some more butter and put some flecks of butter on the top, like so. Up. This is going to come in more useful right at the end when we're going to brown the potatoes under the, well, I call it a grill, I think you call it the broiler. You're going to broil it. The grill being the barbecue. whoever said that we share the same language is wrong. I want to put the lid back on the top, the pot. Remember I said you can use aluminum foil if you don't have a pot like this. This is very clever. I take the handle off, I get my oven mitts so as not to, and it goes into the oven. And that's going to cook for about 50 minutes to 1 hour. So let's get back to our tarte tatin. And the way we're going to caramelize the apples is by putting our pan directly onto the heat here. We're going to melt the butter and the sugar onto the dish very slowly. You don't want to burn it. And while that's melting, we're going to peel and slice the apple. So I'm going to turn it on very, very low. We can always turn it on a little bit higher when we're ready. So we want to have 3 ounces of butter. I think 3 ounces of butter is obviously 3/4 of a stick of butter, 6 tablespoons, I believe. And we're going to add that to the pan. I'm using unsalted sweetened butter here. And let's swirl that around a little bit. You may have noticed when I was preparing the Hotpot, I was using a plastic spatula. I try to be kind to my dishes and use plastic on them rather than using steel so I don't scrape them too much. The problem with plastic is that you could put them down and melt them, and I have a few melted spatulas. But I think it's probably a better idea to do it that way. There we are, we can swirl it around and then we can leave it. A little bit later, when that's melted a bit more, we're going to add 4 ounces of sugar, 1 cup of sugar. And now I'm going to prepare my apples. For today, I'm going to use Macintosh apples. I like to use dessert apples that have a little bit of a bite to them. If you use a different kind of apple that isn't quite so acidic, then I think you lose that lovely appley taste. Now I think I'll have this bowl for the peelings. I like to try and keep things neat and not spread them around. It's always a little bit annoying having these little stickers on them. So I would say that you will need 5 or 6 apples for this dish if they're Macintosh size. But what you must do probably is make sure you have a couple of extras and keep going and see how many you're going to need to put in the dish. I mean, everybody eats apples, so it doesn't matter having that hanging around. You don't have to do what I do and find a new dish for your apples. Just give it to your child. So now this is the way I prepare apples. I cut them into quarters. And I slice like that, again with a very sharp knife. Well, I'll tell you a story about when I first moved to the United States. Nobody understood when I went to the delicatessen and I asked for 1/4 pound of ham, please. Nobody understood 1/4 pound of ham. So in the end I'd have to say 1/4 pound of ham, please. And suddenly I got what I wanted. And I thought it was so funny that by using a D, I got myself understood. The same was when I went to a fish restaurant and I was referring to the fish as a fillet of fish. I had a friend with me who laughed so much and she said, "You lived in France, you know it's a fillet." And it's only a fillet in France, I thought. So there's a couple of things that I learned early on through trial and error about how to pronounce things the American way. I don't know that I do so well all the time. But anyway, so here we are in quarters, and you're going to continue to cut your apples like so. Do 3 or 4 or 5 to begin with, and then we'll see how we get along. Our butter's taking a little bit of time to melt, but it really is a much better idea to take time over melting your butter than putting it on a very high heat and then having burnt butter. And you cannot get away with using burnt butter in any recipe, I'm telling you, it's horrible. If ever you burn butter, don't even try to save it, just throw it out and start again. There we go. Now we can add our sugar. So this is 4 ounces of sugar, like I said, or a cup. And this is where the caramelizing process is going to come in, because that sugar is going to cook nicely along with the butter. and it's going to make a caramel, like a toffee. It really is so good. I actually adapt this Tarte Tatin recipe, which might make the Tatin sisters turn in their graves, but I use pears and I use other seasonal fruits. It doesn't work so well with very wet fruit, but you could even try rhubarb. I think it'd be very nice with apricots, plums, whatever. I mean, it's still the same idea. You're going to caramelize your fruit and then put your pastry on top, but it is just best, I think, with apples. Go on, melt. So I've taken my pastry out of the fridge, which and just leave it there while I start preparing my apples. They're quartered, and I'm going to bring them over to the pan, and it's starting to bubble very nicely. Excuse me, I left my oven mitts over here. Now underneath it's not the same size, so you do have to keep moving it around so that you get an equal distribution of the caramelizing. Otherwise you're going to have guests with a nice caramelized bit and guests with an uncaramelized bit. And if you could smell it, you'd have the smell of toffee apples at the moment, as it's now. So let's turn down the heat, because this is exactly how we want it. Okay, I've swirled it around. Oops, and now we're going to just add our potatoes. Apples! We've done the potatoes, now it's the apples. And let's go around in a nice circle like this. I think I have enough. Maybe you might need to slice up and peel one more apple. But it's always best to start on the outside, because the heat is actually concentrated in the middle, so you want to get going with the apples on the outside first. Oh, well. There we go, that was lucky. I had just the right amount. So I think that was 4 apples, but you know, depending on the size of your apple, it might come out. Now you want to leave this for about 10 minutes. Just watch it, make sure it doesn't burn. Keep the heat quite low, because when sugar heats it gets very, very hot very quickly, and you do want to sort of move it around a little bit so that there's an even distribution of the caramel. That's looking good. Alright, so you need to keep an eye on this and just make sure that you're browning evenly on all sides. Okay, that's great. What you can also do, if you like, is cut up more apple and just fill in the empty spaces as you wish. This will be fine as it is. Now this way the apples are softening as well. They're actually not going to be in the oven for more than, the tart isn't going to go into the oven for more than about 15-20 minutes. Pastry doesn't need much longer than that. It's going to be a hot oven, 425. Unfortunately it's not the same temperature as the Hotpot. But this is a dish you can actually cook earlier. And even though it's nice to have it served warm, you can also heat it up very gently in the oven, cover it over in a, I don't know, 250 degrees, but it is best served warm. Okay, it's now about 50 minutes since we put the hot pot in the oven, so let's have a look at it. That smells good. Now, there we are. I can see the gravy bubbling away there inside. But what we want to do now is crisp up those potatoes. So I'm going to remove the lid, and we're now going to crisp it underneath the boiler. The broiler. That's because I call it a grill. It's hard to remember these words sometimes. And I'm going to put a little bit more butter on the top of the potatoes. Remember, it already has a little bit of butter on, so you don't need to put on too much. Excuse me, I'm going to use my fingers here. There we go. That is runny butter. Alright, that'll be fine. Just another way you can do it is by using your microwave or melting the butter and using a brush to brush it on. It would probably be a little bit more even like that, but this is fine. However you like to do it is fine. There we go. So now this is ready to go under the broiler. Put your broiler up on high. 5 minutes or so, you're just going to keep checking on it. You don't want it to burn, you just want it to crisp. So let's go. Your finished product, and it's lovely and crispy on the top. So I'm going to put my pastry on top of the apples. All right, now because it's been in the refrigerator, it's pretty well behaved, and you can actually transfer it like that. Don't be scared, look at that, doesn't it behave nicely? Now what you want to do, and take a few of the trimmings off, but you can roll this out again and use it to make little jam tarts or something like that with your kids. Never waste anything. You could even make little mini tarte tatin. All right, so I'm going to cut around the edge here. Even though I used my template, obviously I went over a little bit. It's very hard to do things totally accurately, and you want to push it down here. There we are. Now, anytime I use pastry, there's something in me that makes me have to do this. I don't know why, whether it's on top or underneath. I always seem to put little air holes in there. Okay, now we're just waiting for the oven to heat up. Okay, so the oven's ready, and let's just pop it in on the middle shelf. Woo, went flying. And we're going to cook that for 15 to 20 minutes, probably closer to the 20 than the 15. I'm going to put my timer on around about 18, and we can have a look at it at 18 minutes. So there we are. All right, and now for the most spectacular part of the whole program, the whole show, we are going to turn over our apple tart. I should say, don't try this, viewers at home. Of course, you do have to try this. So here goes. Now, this is the way I have found of doing it. I'm actually going to slide it off the table, and I'm going to catch the dish underneath with my other hand. Oops, I'm going to get a very good grip, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and over. There we go. Easy. Tap, 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 tap. Get our spoon ready, just in case we have to scrape things off, and let's see what's happened. Ooh, sounds good. All right. Oh, marvellous. Perfect. Thank you very much for watching the show. I hope you'll watch us again, and I hope you'll enjoy cooking these meals. Bye-bye. Beautiful. Where should I start from? I want to say England doesn't have its own really traditional cuisine, but it's very open to other. Yes. But I'm just trying to think of a way to phrase that.
Acceptance, open.
Embraces other.
Yeah, has a wealth of different cuisines. If you go to London, you will find. Well, I'll find it. Okay.
Okay, let's start from.
Legacy of the Empire, huh?
So the most traditional English dish is, of course, curry. The good thing about England is that we embrace all different cultures, and we let into our homes all different kinds of cuisine. So you will find people cooking Asian food, European food, American food, probably Australian food, African food, whatever. And that's one of the fun things about cooking, English cooking. And I have to say, all my English friends are the best cooks I know.
Beautiful. Very good. Very good. Thing about Wendy?
This is Wendy Wood Quickney, very famous poet from Princeton, but also very good designer of very cute kitchens, and also a wonderful makeup artist and one of my best friends.
Beautiful. Very well done. Very good.
Okay, I'll say that.
Okay.